Hi everyone, I'm Martin and welcome to another edition of Astronomy for Beginners, and welcome to part 2 on the product review and guide of the SynGuider 2. Now today is a nice day. I thought it would be a good idea to physically show how the SynGuider 2 is set up, and basically I'm just going to do a basic dry run through the equipment, how to run the SynGuider 2. And also, if the weather clears up tonight, I will do an actual guiding session with the camera and show you how to go through all the menus and the controls. So, as I mentioned before on part 1 on the SynGuider 2, is there are certain aspects, as it states in the manual, it states that you have to be familiar with the controls of the SynGuider, and it is true. And again, first off, you've got to imagine that you've got to have your power cable connected up, you have your handset connected up, and then your more important, the ST lead connected to the camera and the mount. So once you've got the power in place and all that set up, you can then attach it to your guide scope, or you can attach it to your off-axis guider, depending on what method you're going to use. Personally, I would recommend for beginners to use a guide scope method like this one. Now, I'm fully aware that the SynGuider 2 works with an 80mm aperture, a focal length of 400mm at least. But for this setup here, I'm going to try it out tonight with the SynGuider 2 to prove to people that you could use this 80mm guide scope to do the job. Hopefully it should work, I don't know. However, as I mentioned before, as I always recommend for beginners and people first starting out, when you first buy your guide cam or whatever astro equipment you use, and it's always best to get used to the equipment, and by doing dry runs like this, it will practice you on getting your equipment well prepared, ready to go on a typical observing session. And this is the correct way to do it. And doing dry runs, it seems a bit weird setting up a telescope during the day, but believe me, you save a lot of hassle at night. Also pay particular attention of the attachments of your setup, more importantly the balance as well. So when you get familiarised on your equipment, you know exactly that your equipment is balanced and ready to go. So doing dry runs help you, even if the mount is set up to point north. As you can see, my mount is set up and it's pointing north. So a dry run like this, there's nothing wrong with doing it, okay? And it's basically getting the telescope ready for the night session. Now, as I mentioned before about the SynGuider 2, this is a standalone guider. Now, most guide cams that are attached to a computer have an advantage where you can use the capture software, and you can actually get your guide camera focused during the day. All you got to do is adjust a few exposure levels and brightness, and you can actually get this guide camera focused. However, with the SynGuider 2, it's not possible because it's basically just an LCD screen, and if you did try to use it during the day, you won't see anything because it'll be just a dark screen. All this camera does is detects the pixel sizes of the stars as pinpoints, and that's what shows up on the screen. Some of the guide cameras, like the GP camera for example, you could do this during the day and you can get this guide scope focused. However, it's not to worry. The main thing is to prove that you can get this SynGuider to focus, and the one way to do it is if we disconnect the SynGuider. So we disconnect the SynGuider for the time being. and we're just going to hang it over here. It's not ideal. Now, as mentioned in the instruction manual, it's best to use an eyepiece, and a 25mm eyepiece like this. I've fitted the extension tube and the focal ring, and basically, as I mentioned on some of my guides, is that you need your guide scope to be aligned to the main tube, as for either a dot finder or finder scope. So it's very crucial that your guide scope is in line, sort of near enough. You don't have to have it properly aligned, but for this purpose only, is to have the guide scope aligned to the main tube and point it to a landscape feature, you know, something that's 3, maybe 4 miles away, and just point it at a feature. And what you're going to do is, using the eyepiece, now in the book the SynGuider 2 works really well with a telescope with a focuser tube. Unfortunately, this type of guide scope here that I have doesn't have that. You've basically got to do the old method, is slot the eyepiece in back and forth using the focal ring, and it can be a bit fiddly. And the whole idea is, once you've pointed at a target, you basically look through, look at the object, and basically adjust the focal ring. Once you think you're focused, you lock the focal ring, okay, alright, do a quick check, and focused. Basically what you've done there is you're trying to test, see if you can achieve focus on the guide scope. So if you were properly focused, basically your focal ring here is now locked in place, and that is you now ready. So basically the whole idea with this eyepiece is, if you want to locate a bright star or guide star that you want to select for the SynGuider to lock on, it's best to have an eyepiece, put it in there, find the star you want, tighten the screws. Once you're happy you've got your guide star, you can take out the eyepiece. You fit the SynGuider in there. However, usually the eyepieces you can get, the wide field eyepieces and the 10mm eyepieces, trying to align the star perfectly in the center is what you're trying to do, and you're trying to get it as central as possible within the eyepiece, the field of view, so that the SynGuider can see it within its chip. Don't forget the chip is very small, so it can be a bit tricky. However, top recommendation is to use an eyepiece like this. This is a illuminated reticle eyepiece. You can buy this from Skywatcher, or any decent astronomy retailer will be able to sell you one of these items. And basically all it is a 12.5mm focal length eyepiece, and basically it has a reticle inside like a target sign, and basically this device here, if you switch it on here, will give you, it will brighten up the reticle inside. It is extremely accurate, and believe it or not, this is used for guiding as well. In the olden days, the actual star guiding was, believe it or not, was actually guided by hand. And basically the astronomer had his main camera, and he will actually look through the eyepiece on the guide scope, okay, and with the slow motion controls, with the telescope that's still exposing, and obviously the camera shutter is open, the astronomer used to just use the slow motion controls, look at the guide star, and then just basically track by hand using the slow motion controls. And that was, believe it or not, that was the only way to do long exposures. And it takes a lot of time, a lot of effort, and it was very tricky. But today now, we don't have that problem. and obviously using the guide scopes and the guide camera using via the ST4 port lead will enable astronomers now to track automatically without needing to worry about things like that. So with that eyepiece, recommendation is to get a illuminated eyepiece, and you can buy them for around about 40 to about £60. It sounds a lot, but believe me, this saves a lot of hassle. You want to try and make things easy for yourself. And again, it is the same process, because don't forget, if you're using different eyepieces, they have different focal points. So again, using a parafocal ring like I have here, and then you just basically slide it in there. Once you achieve focus, lock it in place on the parafocal ring, and then that's your position. So again, you use your eyepiece to focus on a star, and then once you're focused on a star and it's central, you can then put on the SynGuider like so. Once you're focused, now the SynGuider, because its screen being limited, is that you also need to focus the SynGuider as well. Now, because the star is now centered in the eyepiece, that should be in view of the SynGuider. And now I can't describe it until I show you at night how to do the settings and all that, but basically you should have the star on the screen. Once it's on there, you can adjust the exposure time limit on the handset, and so that you can adjust the settings and the noise levels, but that will become apparent later on. So with that, now you should have the star in place, and you should then do the same procedure again. It is fiddly, but the problem is you need this for the SynGuider to track properly. And again, it's the same process. Now with the SynGuider, providing you've got the guide scope centered and you use your eyepiece, again I would recommend to invest in a secondary parafocal ring. And again, they don't cost that much money. You can buy one from Tring Astronomy or Amateur Astro, and they will sell these parafocal rings at a good price. It's a really good accessory, and basically the same process as what you do with the eyepiece. You should have your star centered. You put your parafocal ring here. Okay, you may need to use an extension tube depending on your guide scope. And again, same process, carefully, as the SynGuiders should be in place. You basically just back and forth, okay, and with this star focus, you want to try and get as pinpoint as possible, alright, as small as possible. Once you think you're focused, okay, you then lock the guide scope, and then you lock your parafocal ring. Okay, so you lock it in place, you lock your parafocal ring, and that's you focus on the star. Okay, so it is a bit tricky on this guide scope method because it's only a small 50mm guide scope. Now if you had a 70mm or a 60mm or an 80mm guide scope, which is basically just a telescope, then you could just adjust it with your focus wheel on the telescope and do it that way. Bear in mind, when you're using an actual telescope itself, you may need to use an extension tube or a mirror diagonal to compensate, because with the actual telescope they have a longer focal length, and you might need to extend the tube or the focal point for the camera to focus. So So that's something you need to be aware of. Now for this guide scope, I'm very lucky. In fact, I'm extremely lucky, because I don't really need a parafocal ring. I'm actually quite lucky, and basically all I've done is done a quick focusing on the actual objective lens, and I did that last night, just a mild tuning before the clouds come in, and I was lucky to get a star. Use a bright star, because believe me, bright stars are easy to focus, and it didn't really matter on the exposure as well, because they're so bright you'll pick them up straight away on the screen. And I'm lucky because here, all the way up to the edge to the nose piece, I'm already at the focus point already. But if you're using the Orion guide scope, which is a 50mm guide scope, you may need to use the parafocal ring. So again, invest in another parafocal ring to ensure that once you focus, you don't want to start messing about on the focus ever again. Once you're happy, your star and your SynGuider will be focused properly now. So that's just something to highlight on the setup. Also, when you're guiding, when you're using SynGuider, on the screen there'll be a set of crosshairs, and basically these crosshairs is you want to orientate the camera, basically sync the camera around along the RA axis. So at the moment the RA axis is, the camera is slightly out, so basically I want to level the actual screen. So I basically tilt the screen like this, like so, like that, and whether it's a good idea when the star drifts, wherever it drifts to, you angle the position of where the star drifts. Okay, and you see like a crosshair, and the crosshair, with the star starts to drift to the right, you tilt it across, and then you should be orientated. Okay, this is very important for the guider to detect the motion of the star. So once you know that where the star is moving across at a certain angle, you orientate the crosshairs. So you orientate it, so if the star drifts this way, you orientate the crosshairs like this. Okay, it will become explanatory once I do the actual live guiding tonight. So hopefully, now the SynGuider 2 is now focused and orientated with the star. Also, one thing I do need to highlight is, if you want to ensure that the SynGuider to track properly and lock onto a star and auto guide effectively, one key area is a lot of beginners make the mistake is make sure you have your equatorial mount polar aligned to Polaris. Okay, it is very crucial that you get your polar scope aligned to Polaris as accurate as you can. If you skip that process and you don't polar align, guess what? That SynGuider is not going to guide the star effectively. So never skip polar alignment. In fact, polar alignment should be the first step. Once you've got your telescope and your mount set up, get this mount polar aligned. It is very crucial that you do that. If you want the SynGuider to track and guide properly, this has to be polar aligned. So make sure you get the North Star polar aligned along the mount. Okay, so when you're taking a picture on your DSLR camera or your CCD, if this is polar aligned properly, your stars aren't going to trail. However, there is a limit. When you start pushing the exposure times on your camera or your CCD, the more that tracking becomes affected. So again, it all determines on how well you polar align your mount. Some nights you may get tracking up to about a minute or 2 minutes, and that's unguided. Some nights is, if your polar alignment is not that great, some nights you'd be lucky to get just 4 or 5 seconds. It really just depends on how well you get your polar alignment. So my top tip is never rush into getting your polar alignment. Okay, take polar alignment steady and take your time and get it as accurate as you can. There are apps that you can use, like Polar Finder, that enable you to find the position of Polaris, because believe me, Polaris actually does rotate within a degree, 1 degree field of view. So it does rotate over the time within a small circle. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to align the polar scope slightly off Polaris to the actual dead center of the sky. So it does actually rotate in a circle to about 1 degree. So it's very crucial that you get your alignment spot on. Using apps like Polar Finder is very useful, okay, and it will determine what position Polaris should be. So what you do is you set your reticle where the Polaris is on the clock face. Once you've got it in position, alright, and your mount say like here, for example, the clock position is whatever, you move the altozimuth bolts and your latitude bolts, get it in the position where it states in the app, and then once you're happy, that shoe should be polar aligned, and then basically you put it into this home position and it should be okay. It should be set. However, a good thing about the Ioptron mounts is I do like the handy feature on their handset is they have the polar position locator on there, and on their handset, as long as you put in the correct date and time, it will find you the position of Polaris. So that's a good thing about the Ioptron mounts, and believe it or not, their polar scope and the app on the handset is really good, and I've been able to track my Ioptron mount with my 66mm, the same setup, for about a good 2 minutes unguided. So that's pretty impressive. But if you can get 2 minutes unguided, then what's going to be like for the SynGuider to guide? So that's something to point out. Again, don't skip the process of polar alignment. So once you've done all the setup and all that, you should be good to go. So what we're going to do now, setting the SynGuider on screen so you can see what I'm doing, and I'm going to go through all the settings and adjustments and all that. And it's if you get this right, SynGuider will work for you, and we'll take a closer look from there. So I'm actually going to give you a little bit of insight on the layout of the controls of the SynGuider. First off, we've got the handset. Now the good thing about the handset is once you've got it all set up with SynGuider, you can disconnect the handset and let it just do its own thing and carry on auto guiding, so you don't have to have the handset attached. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the basic layout. As you can see here, the plus and minus, right? Basically the plus and minus is the exposure rate. Okay, so when you increase the exposure rate, you're basically increasing the sensitivity of the stars appearing on screen. The higher you increase the exposure times, the more the stars will appear on view. This is your directional keys, up and down, left and right, and basically these are used for moving obviously the SynGuider menu up and down. So if you're selecting the menu, you can just scroll down and left and right to also go through the menus. You've got the enter key. Obviously I'm not going to explain fully what that does, because we should all know the enter key is basically confirming a typical function you're going to activate. You've got the escape key, which is basically if you have gone into a menu and you didn't want to do something, you can cancel out of it and go back on the page. And last of all, we've got the menu button. So it is a very basic layout. It's not too brain taxing, which is good. Skywatcher, they try to keep their guide system as basic as possible. So here at the moment on the screen we have the preview screen. Now this will be the first thing you will see once your guide scope is fully focused, and you will start to get a star appear that looks like a white dot that will appear on screen. Preview gives you a list of different menus. At the moment it tells you what exposure rate I'm at this point here. Then you've got the brightness. Now pay particular notice on the brightness. Basically this is a value that tells you how bright a star can be. For it to work properly is make sure that all your guide stars or whatever star you're going to select is higher than 10. Anything lower than 10 value, it won't be recommended as a decent bright star to guide. It also tells you the position of X and Y coordinates. This is not really particularly useful. I wouldn't even worry about the X and Y positions of that star. It also tells you the amount of zoom that's within that star, and then you've got the X0 and Y0. Now these two coordinates are basically the corrections that's being added to the mount. So when you see a -1 or a +2 or something within those values, it's basically what that is doing is SynGuider is actually operating, and as it's guiding you'll see those values go up or go down. And what that is it tells the mount where to move and where to stop tracking, and so basically just like error corrections for the mount, and that will enable you to guide for longer. It's a basic preview video screen, and there's nothing much there. The only things you would pay particular notice is the exposure rate and the brightness. Those are really the ones you should take notice. To increase the exposure, it's quite simple. As we press on the plus, you press it and you get to 1200 milliseconds to about 2000 milliseconds. And obviously as you increase exposure, you will have a delay of the star's movement, so there'll be a slight delay on the stars. So again, when you increase the exposure, that will happen, and you'll have to like try and get the actual exposure time correct level. You know, pressing the button, we go all the way down. You can go all the way down to 2, I believe. So you're on 2, which is like the minimum exposure. So when you first start using your SynGuider, it says in the book recommended that you set your SynGuider to an exposure level of 100 milliseconds. So pressing the exposure time to 100, you press menu, and it gives you another option screen. It gives you centric zoom on the star, zoom in zoom in as a center, and then you got the lock, then guide, cross, deck play, noise, and then reset. Now zoom star is basically if the star is quite small, you can zoom in onto the star, and that's basically what that does. And to activate that is you just press enter, and with the directional keys you just basically press up and down up to about zoom 4. Okay, as you're doing that is you're increasing the zoom level, but you're also reducing the field of view, so you got to be careful when you zoom in with that function. But to be honest with you, I hardly ever use that zoom button. So we can skip out of that. We press escape and we're back onto previous mode. We go onto menu, and again you can actually centralize to the star. Okay, you can actually, you press enter that, and you can actually move these crosshairs, okay, up and down using directional keys, so you can center onto the star itself. But because the screen is dark, we're not going to see any stars because we've not actually got it connected to a guide scope, so you're not going to see anything from there. So when you center onto the star, you can just center it in there in the position of the sensor, and that's what that does. So we escape from that. It goes back to menu, press menu again, and this is the ones you're going to use the most. You've got the menu called lock, so we scroll down to lock and we press enter, and basically it gives you two options. One, you can manually lock the star yourself, which is manual, or you can auto lock. To be honest with you, depending on your choices, you can either lock it yourself or let the SynGuider do it for you. Personally, I let it do it for me. You select auto, just press enter. It will lock onto a star. Okay, very important that you do that, because if the SynGuider is not locked onto a star or within the sensor's area, is that it's not going to lock to able to guide. So you must lock it first. Once you've locked onto a star, you then press menu and you go and highlight to cross guide. You press enter from that, and again it gives you an option saying auto cal or resume. Now auto cal is basically what it does is it does its calibration sequence. So when you press enter, okay, it will enter, and what it will do is it will add any corrections from SynGuider to the mount. It will track the motion of the stars, and once it's detected some motions, then SynGuider will work out a way calculations to correct the mount, and once it's programmed, you'll be able to guide. Once its sequence is completed, you will then have a preview screen that will go on to and says guide, and once it says guide, that's it. That is basically the SynScan working, and you'll see the star with the crosshair locked in place. An auto cal failed because I have not locked into a star, so it's not going to find it. But okay, we come out of that, so press escape, and again it's still on the locked menu, so basically it's still locked on a star, and basically you enter that, press menu, and again there's another menu called cross. Press enter that. Cross is basically do you want the actual target sign on screen? That's all it is. So if you want a target sign on the screen itself, you don't have to have it. You can switch it off. But personally, it never really bothered me as such. So we escape from that. We go into menu again, and then we've got declaration of play. And again, you can actually adjust the backlash in your declaration axis of your mount. So you can actually adjust the tracking. So if it is starting to guide either too slowly or too fast and you start to get star trailing, you can do different adjustments. So you can, as long as you can use the directional keys up and down, it goes up to a value of 4, so you can actually adjust the backlashing of the guiding. A couple of tweaks on that may actually correct some of the guiding errors on it. So we escape from that. We'll go back to menu, and this one is we're going to select is noise. You've got to get noise to a definite setting. What do I mean by the noise level is you've got to adjust the noise within a certain amount of exposure times, because with noise, the trouble is though, if you increase the noise up, yes, you make the camera a lot more sensitive, but you may add a lot more interference in the actual chip, and basically the electronics build up in the actual sensor itself will heat up and create hot pixels. So if you have too much noise, you will end up introducing a lot of hot pixels. So you could be guiding on a hot pixel. So you got to be careful when you set your noise level. Okay, so if you have it too much, you get more pixelated noise in the actual image itself, and you may be looking onto a star which is actually a hot pixel. So you've got to adjust the noise level to a manageable level, because you've got to have some noise so that stars will show up on the screen. So again, adjusting the levels between noise and exposure times is a bit of a balance. You've got to balance between the two. Okay, so if you increase the noise, you end up getting more hot pixels. Yeah, it makes it more sensitive, but you don't want it too noisy. So you've got to drop it back down to a manageable level so the stars are still rounded and they still appear on screen, but you don't want to be seeing too many hot pixels. So you've got to up the gain of the noise level, up and down. It just really depends, and it also depends on the skies you have as well. So again, just be careful with the noise setting. But again, it's easy to set up. You just adjust the noise level, okay, and when you start going down certain levels, you know, up and down. So at the moment set. Now as you can see here, as I increase the noise, you can see now the pixels are starting to appear. These are the hot pixels, and again, you increase that noise too much, it becomes a very noisy picture, and you don't want a noisy picture, because again, yes, the noise, it makes the camera a lot sensitive, but just be careful, because again, you get too much noise. You want to minimize it, so like here on that screen here, the stars won't be as pixelated, so you'll still have a bit of whitening and that, so you've got to balance in between the two. So again, we click on to menu, we click on escape, and last but not least is reset. Reset is basically whatever functions or whatever setting you have, you can press the reset button by pressing enter, and basically it resets itself to factory settings. So it basically reboots itself and all the original settings will be activated, and that's what that reset button is. But that's basically the actual layout of the SynGuider. There's actually nothing to it, to be honest with you. And this will just give you an idea how this system of the SynGuider works. So again, it's just a little introduction so that you guys and girls get familiar with the controls. And the more practice you do on getting used to the handset and the SynGuider, the better that you are going to be on setting the SynGuider. Because the more you're confident on using the equipment, the better you can get your imaging rig set up, ready to be imaging. No time's wasted. This is very useful training, so get your head round these settings, okay? But again, get this right, SynGuider will work for you, and believe me, practice makes perfect. You will have bad nights where you will have your SynGuider and it might not be working properly, but there are many factors to reasons why it could go wrong. It could mean that the weather's not particularly great, you have not got decent skies, you've got a lot of atmospheric turbulence. It means a lot of things, you know what I mean? Even your telescope mount is not balanced, or you're not polar aligned. There's several factors, but again, doing basic training, getting used to the kit will give you a better chance, and some nights you will achieve awesome guiding, and some nights you won't even hardly get any guiding at all. So again, it's a lot of practice. You've got to take your time, step by step, get used to the equipment you're using, and once you get used to the equipment, you have a good chance of getting some awesome results of your images. So again, thanks for watching part 2. Please subscribe onto my channel, and please join our Facebook group, Astronomy for Beginners. Got some good useful advice out there, and also look forward to part 3. I'm actually setting the equipment physically so that you can see how the SynGuider or how auto guiding works, and believe me, you'll be quite surprised how simple it is. So again, look forward for part 3, and thanks again, thanks for watching, and clear skies to you all.